everyone, I hope you're all doing really well, and welcome to the next part of this Flamingo tutorial where we'll be progressing down the neck. It's going to be quite a long one, I feel like, this one, because even though, you know, it's basically repeating what we did in part one in terms of all of these really vibrant feathers, there's just quite a lot to kind of cover. But I'm going to be using similar colours. They do get a little bit more orangey as we get down the neck, whereas around the eye they're very red. So the colours might differ slightly, but all in all they should be pretty much the same. I have actually ordered some Pan Pastels which are out for delivery. They've not arrived yet, but I thought when we get to the point of drawing all these other feathers that are a completely different texture, they're much bigger than the feathers on the head and the neck, I thought just to kind of fill in the space a little bit quicker and have that really nice, like, softer, like dusty pink base in some areas, it might be nice to just incorporate a few Pan Pastels. Now, I know some of you don't use them at all and some of you have very limited Pan Pastels, and to be honest I do as well. I only have, if I just show you my collection, so over the past like 2 years this is how many I've managed to collect. They're all very neutral colours, but I thought I'll treat myself to 3 brand new Pan Pastel colours. So I thought I'd just let you know the 3 colours of Pan Pastels that I've ordered, just so you might want to order them yourself for the next part of this tutorial. So it's the Permanent Red Tint, the Magenta Tint and the Pearlescent Red. So they're all kind of different shades of pink really. The Pearlescent Red is kind of like an in-between, like orange and pink. So I'm guessing that is going to be the perfect colour to use as like a base for some of these feathers as we kind of progress down the body in the later parts. But yeah, so for part 3, I'm going to be drawing in the neck. So because we've kind of done this on the head is like on the right hand side, and if you're right-handed, you just want to put a piece of like scrap paper over that so you don't risk kind of smudging it. And I'm just going to use an eraser just to lightly rub out those initial outlines towards the edges of the neck, because we definitely don't want to be seeing those underneath our drawing. I've had some absolutely lovely feedback on this Flamingo so far. Some really nice comments, and I think, to be honest, it's just because it's quite different to what we've done before, and the colours are just so vibrant, they're like exploding off the page. So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying this one so far. So I have just got up the materials list that I used for part 1, just as a bit of a guide to keep me on track with the similar colours. So I'm not kind of figuring it out as I go, as I did with the first one. I've kind of got that guide already that I'm going to sort of go off a little bit. I will need to change it though towards the end of the neck where it gets more orangey, but generally it should be pretty similar. So I'm going to start with the pink white luminance pencil and just use this as a base layer for the entirety of the neck really. The neck is also slightly out of focus in comparison with the head, so you just want to add a bit of a light layer throughout the whole neck. I didn't use this as a base layer for part 1 through all of the head, because I think if you apply a really pale base layer initially, it can sometimes desaturate those colours that you kind of add on top. And because the neck and the head is so vibrant, you know, you just want to keep your pressure quite light so it doesn't really affect the vibrancy of the colours that you add on top. So I'm just doing like short back and forth motions, just basically filling in the space really, using the flatter side of my pencil, using it on its side and working right up to the edge. In a way, you're kind of following the formation of those feathers as they kind of go up and then curve round down the neck. So sort of copy those directions with your shading and your pencil strokes. So you can see how pale and subtle that colour is in comparison with the paper. Well, there's not really much difference. I just like to add a luminance pencil as a base layer because I think everything just blends a lot easier when you add layers on top, because it's such like a waxy, creamy pencil. It definitely helps to kind of blend those colours that you add on top. So I'm going to leave that there with the pink white. Make sure you've also kind of flicked out a little bit as well along those sort of outer edges, just to start to bring in that sort of feathery texture, like that. Next up, I'm just going to add a little bit of the silver grey luminance pencil, just at the top of the neck here, where we've got that sort of blue sky or blue background sort of reflecting back onto those feathers, creating this subtle blue tint at the top of the neck. Just to make that more intense, just ever so slightly, I'm going to go in with the light cobalt blue, which is slightly more vibrant. And focus this more just on those like outer edges. Kind of joining it up with where we finished for part one. Unlike with fur, where, you know, if you were drawing like the edge of an ear or something like that, you do loads of like really fine flicky hairs. With feathers, you kind of want to clump them together a little bit more, so they're a bit more separate, if you will. So we've got like thicker, like tufts in a way that are flicking out rather than loads of tiny fine hairs. Just resembles feathers a little bit more. But yeah, I'm going to leave that there with the light cobalt blue. Next up, I'm going to go in with the Herculaneum Red, which we used quite a lot. I mean, it's been one of our main colours, I'd say, for around the head, and especially this like top part of the beak. It's like a really nice pinky neutral colour to use. So I'm just going to sort of outline the edges of the neck very, very lightly. And then from that, you want to just start shading, really, working into that pink white and just adding another layer over the top of that that's still really quite neutral and subtle. We are going to bring in those really vibrant colours, but it's just going to be more of a gradual process, just so we end up with that really smooth, kind of blurry outcome really at the end. We want all our colours to be kind of melting into each other. So really look at how those feathers are formed and what direction they're going in. So I'm sort of merging it with the edge of that silver grey and those like blue tones that we've just added. So in some areas I can see some of my pencil strokes. So I'm just, again with like the flatter side of my pencil, just go over those areas to kind of soften them a little bit. Just so it's sort of even all the way through. But don't worry too much about that because, you know, it's going to get covered anyway by more layers. But yeah, I've just also added a little bit more pressure slightly where we've got this shadowy area sort of underneath the neck as it's curving round. So I'm going to leave that there with the Herculean Red. Next up I'm going to go in with the light yellow glaze, which initially does look quite weird, but it does really have an impact on the whole process and keeping all those colours really vibrant from underneath. So I'm just going to mainly apply this to like the gingery, like orangey area at the bottom of the neck here. Just add a light layer, work that into what we've got down already. And like I said, it will look a bit bizarre at first, but just trust the process, as always with coloured pencils. So I'm just going to release my pressure slightly and kind of fade it off about a third to halfway up the neck, like that. Next up I'm going to go in with the shade Salmon, which is a gorgeous like coral pink colour. Again, we use this quite a lot on the beak and for those feathers around the eye on the head. So you just want to, again, quite lightly, just work into the neck, adding another layer over everything that we've got so far, maybe just slightly fading it off towards the end of the neck. But yeah, just kind of build that up gradually. And still really pay attention to the direction of the feathers. It's very easy just to kind of follow along, you know, that outer edge, but actually the feathers next to it are kind of pointing slightly diagonally, like towards that edge. I think instead of doing like very individual pencil strokes like I was just doing then, if you continue to use like the flat side of the pencil and just wear that down as much as you can, kind of using it on its side, and do like almost small circular motions, constantly going over the same sort of areas, so everything is just blended all the time. As soon as you start doing individual pencil strokes, it might get a little bit too detailed, and like I've just said, the neck is very much out of focus in comparison with the head, which kind of gives the illusion that the head is like in the foreground and it's very much in front of the neck. The neck's more in the background. So, you know, little details and paying attention to, you know, where different things are in focus and out of focus is actually really important for the final drawing and making sure you've got that sort of perspective right. So I think I am actually going to do a light layer right at the bottom of the neck and work right down like into that orangey part. Next up I'm going to go in with the dark cadmium orange, which is a really vibrant orange, which again we've used quite a lot of for the beak and the head so far. So just like we've done with the shade salmon, you want to repeat the same process. So just, you know, start working over the top, adding another layer with a sort of light to medium pressure. Maybe press down slightly harder where we've got those like subtle shadowy areas, so especially where it's kind of curving round underneath. And you should start to see quite a lot of that grainy texture from the paper at this point, which is a good thing because then we can still add quite a few more layers over the top. We've still got a lot of that tooth to work with. So I'm now just adding like another layer over those slightly darker areas. So underneath the neck, curving round, and like those more kind of subtle shadowy bits within the feathers that kind of show more of the structure. So that's covered the neck nicely, and we're sort of slowly getting more towards the colour that we're trying to achieve in the reference photo. So because we've added quite a few layers now of this dark cadmium orange, it has kind of covered those colours underneath. So we want to kind of bring some of those back up to the surface and sort of repeat the same process again. So I'm going to go in again with the Herculaneum Red and mainly work this, I think, towards like the outer edges of the neck where we've got that slightly like pale pink colour. Using a medium pressure, we gradually just want to start filling in and squashing down the tooth of the paper, which it kind of is smoothing out in some places already. So that's not made too much difference, but it has just helped to kind of blend and merge some of those colours together, especially towards like the edges. It's just kind of softened some of that grain ever so slightly. So I'm going to leave that there with the Herculaneum Red. I'm going to go in again briefly with the light yellow glaze. You want to use this with slightly lighter pressure, just to add a bit of a brightness sort of on the lower half of the neck. And then on top of that, I'm going to go in with the salmon again and add like a medium pressured layer, just working into those like pinky tones of the feathers. And then I think after that, we're going to start bringing in some of those more vibrant reds, because we've added a lot of that colour, we've built up a lot of that tonal value now. So we just want to kind of intensify that colour in some areas. So I'm going to leave that there with the shade Salmon. So with the shade Scarlet, which is another luminance pencil, really vibrant red, you want to start working into where those shadowy areas are on the neck. So I'm going to start by sort of shading on the lower half of the neck where it kind of curves round underneath. And you want to judge your pressure by, you know, starting off lightly and seeing, like, judging the colours around it and sort of seeing how much pressure you need to add. But I am going to start off lightly and maybe build it up just a little bit. So make sure you're kind of flicking out slightly along that edge, making it slightly uneven. And also make sure you've like made this section a lot darker than this part of the head, so you're giving it that structure and sort of showing where the head finishes and where it merges into the neck. So if you look at the neck as a whole, I'd probably say this middle section is where it's, you know, predominantly red. It kind of goes from like a bluey pink to a deep red back to like an orangey yellow. So that's how it kind of progresses down the neck. So you mainly want to focus more now on this middle section. So the neck is looking a lot more red now. So I'm going to leave that there for now, I think, with the shade Scarlet, and start to bring back some more of those orangey tones, especially towards like the lower half of the neck. So back in with the dark cadmium orange this time, just to bring back those oranges. Again, applying like a medium pressure, just working over what we've got so far and tinting all those colours, making them more orangey. I'm probably using like a medium to hard pressure, to be honest, at this point. You can kind of judge how much pressure to add by how well it shows up over all your other layers, and how kind of vibrant you're wanting it to be. So yeah, medium to hard pressure with this one, especially working towards the lower half of the neck. And you can see how it's sort of pushing that pigment into those tiny little grooves within the surface of the paper. So we're gradually getting our really blended, smooth outcome, while still building up all that gorgeous, vibrant colour. Just going to add a little bit to the top of the neck as well. I think adding a bit of this orange over the pinks that we've already got down just makes those pinks look a bit more corally. Next up, I'm going to go in with the Anthraquinone Carmine. I've got that name down to a T now, how to pronounce it. So this is slightly darker than the shade Scarlet, so you want to focus on this shadow kind of underneath the neck where it's curving round and like underneath. And again, start off with a light pressure until you kind of figure out how well it's transferring onto what we've already got down, and then maybe apply a slightly harder pressure if you need to, so it kind of shows up a little bit darker over all your layers. So I'm also just applying a little bit of shading sort of in between other areas of the feathers as well, to show a bit more of that structure and how they're all kind of clumped together and like formed all the way down the neck, because we've got kind of clusters of feathers that are really close together, creating subtle shadows all the way down. So I think you want a nice balance between this colour, which is, it's kind of like a berry red. It's very much, you know, a lot warmer, a lot more pinky toned than the Scarlet. So you want a nice balance between this colour and those really vibrant like orangey tones as well. So be careful not to add like too much of this, and just focus mainly on those shadowy areas and darker parts of the feathers. So I think I'm gonna probably leave that there for now with the Anthraquinone Carmine. Just add a tiny little bit just along that edge. So next up, I'm going to go back in with the pink white, which is what we used as that very first initial base layer. And I'm going to use this to kind of soften some of those edges, brighten up like the top half of the neck, and add some of these softer little highlights sort of at the bottom of the neck down here. So I'm going to start with the edge and just use it with like a medium pressure and literally just kind of blend that colour and push that colour into the grooves of the paper, so you're kind of squashing it down, but it also just really helps to kind of blend. Using a luminance pencil, like a lighter coloured luminance pencil over the top of a lot of layers like this, it just blends like an absolute dream. Like honestly, it blends so easily because it's such like a creamy soft pencil. You can almost like drag that pigment out slightly, so it's a bit of a softer finish to that edge, as I'm doing here, kind of smudging that pigment, and it just helps to create that slightly out of focus effect because there's not like a clear defined edge. It kind of just fades off very subtly. Now it will kind of desaturate the colours slightly, but to be honest, they are quite pale anyway, especially along the edge. So if we do want some of that colour back in, then it's just a case of, you know, reapplying some of the colours that we've already used. Just going to add a little bit on like the inside edge as well. Just kind of smudge that, some of that colour, and have some of these feathers like slightly flicking out, creating that uneven edge, just to add to the texture of the feathers. So you can see how well that's just softened the edge and created that slightly blurry outcome. It's honestly just, luminance pencils are just the best for blending. I absolutely love them. So I'm just going to work this now a little bit into the top of the neck. So you can probably see a little bit where I've not added as many layers. We can still just see a tiny bit of that pink white from the very beginning showing through. So I'm just going to reapply this to those areas just to, again, help to kind of blend and just brighten up those particular areas of the top of the neck. And keep everything quite soft, as well as helping to reduce that grainy texture. And then I'm also going to do the same thing to the bottom of the neck down here, like we've just done to the top of the neck. So just brightened some areas and kept everything super soft. Sticking with the paler coloured luminance pencils just to help us to blend a bit more, I'm going to go in now with the Naples Ochre luminance pencil, which is still quite a vibrant yellow, but it's obviously a lot paler than that light yellow glaze that we used before. So I'm just going to use this in those like yellowy toned areas, mainly on like the lower half of the neck. Again, just to help kind of blend out some of that grainy texture. So you just want to use it with a light pressure and just kind of smudge those colours together. kind of working from where we finished off with that pink white on the very edge, kind of working from that into the neck a little bit more. So I'm probably going to leave that there with the Naples ochre. I don't want to add too much because I want to keep that vibrancy. And you know, when you do add a pale colour over the top of vibrant colours, it does kind of desaturate them a little bit. So I've just applied this in those orangey areas, just like little bits here and there to try and reduce that grainy texture and just blend all those colours together that we've got so far. With the Herculaneum Red again, I'm just going to work into the top little bit of the neck, just to add a few more light pinky tones in there. So I've sort of used this to merge the top of the head with the start of the neck. So it just kind of all blends together nicely now. So I'm just applying little bits throughout the rest of the feathers as we progress down the neck. Just kind of pulling out some of those softer highlights. And where we can see a little bit of detail and texture, that's where you want to kind of apply this colour. Work that into your red tones. Next up, I'm going to go back in with the dark cadmium orange, and using a medium to hard pressure, you just kind of want to work around everywhere where we've just kind of added that lighter little bit of detail throughout the neck. And also adding this is going to increase that vibrancy, bring that colour back up to the surface, but we're going to still have that really nice blended outcome at the end. So this is the stage where your hand should start to ache, like mine is doing now. But yeah, it definitely helps applying a harder pressure. But you know, it's worth it for getting that really smooth outcome, and just, you know, with a harder pressure, more of that pigment goes onto the paper, so you can see the difference in vibrancy, like in this section compared to this top part of the neck. So I've just added a bit more of an orangey tint to the top of the head just before it merges into that neck. I'm going to go back in with the shade Scarlet and just increase the intensity of this shadow underneath the neck. So we're almost at the point where I can start pulling out some of those details and just finishing it off with all those kind of finishing touches. But I'm just going to go in now with the shade Salmon again. So I'm constantly kind of switching up my pencils but still using the same sort of colours. I'm just going to go in with the Salmon just to go along those areas that still have a little bit of that grainy texture showing through. We want everything to be completely smooth and none of that grainy texture at all showing through before we go in with our detail. So I'm using this with quite a hard pressure, really squashing down the tooth. So that's looking a lot softer now. Definitely looking a lot more blended and we can't see as much of that grainy texture. I'm just going to go back in again, I think, with the dark cadmium orange just to add like a final layer or so it's definitely all completely smooth. You can probably feel now how, you know, the paper, because it's been squashed down, isn't kind of gripping onto your pencil pigment as much. So you do need to apply that harder pressure for it to show up. might just add a little bit of the burnt sienna 50% to just underneath the neck in this shadowy part. Just to add a bit of a purpley tint over some of that red, to kind of dull it down slightly. I'm also going to go in with the Warm Earth 40% and just work into the top of the neck to start bringing in some of that darker detail. This is a lovely like neutral pinky like fleshy tone, and because you know the top of the neck is still quite bright, this is sort of the perfect neutral colour. So I'm just doing some like little lines amongst those feathers that kind of stand out against everything else for that detail. And then as we progress further down the neck, that detail sort of softens a little bit because it's so out of focus. So you don't need to be as sort of defined with your pencil strokes or your lines, because everything just sort of blends together. I'm going to go in now with the light yellow glaze and just add a light layer along the bottom half of the neck, just to sort of illuminate those colours a little bit more, keeping them really bright. It is actually like acting as like a bit of a glaze over the top, even though it's called light yellow glaze, but that's literally what we're doing. Just adding a bit of a glaze over the top, making everything really vibrant and illuminated. Like that. And then I think I'm going to go in with the white Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle pencil and just pull out some of these like lighter, brighter feathers. Use it with quite a light pressure because this pencil is very, very pigmented and it shows up really well anyway over multiple layers of colour pencil, so you won't really need to apply much pressure. So if you just apply it quite lightly and build it up gradually, you can almost pull out some of these softer highlights, creating that little bit of detail that's still quite soft and blurry. And yeah, it's a really good white pencil to have, this one. It's definitely my favourite. So you want to look at the shapes of these highlights, or these like little bits of feather texture and detail. Look at how they're formed, look at the shapes, look at how far they come out or how they're kind of clustered together. Really kind of break it down. Also drag that pigment from like the outer edge out into the paper so it kind of fades off, so we don't have that defined edge all the way along, just to keep it looking out of focus and slightly blurry. This is going to add a lovely shine and sort of a sense of light to some of those feathers. We'll really be able to see where, you know, where on those feathers the light is being like bouncing off the feathers and how it's kind of curving round and capturing the light in at different points. So that's made such a difference to that detail. It's really brought out those highlights but kept them really soft. I would usually use the craft knife slice tool for highlights like we did on the head, but because that's so, you know, so detailed, you can literally see every single tiny fine hair. It works perfectly for textures like that, but not necessarily for textures like this that are so much more soft. So yeah, that's worked quite well. And again, I've sort of kept complete control of my pencil. I've adjusted my pressure depending on how bright the particular feather or highlight is. So yeah, I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. So just to finish off then, really, I'm just going to define or just kind of work around some of those highlights just to make some areas a little bit darker in terms of that shadow. But again, still keep everything quite soft so it remains out of focus and quite blurry. If some areas are looking a little bit desaturated, you just want to bring back some of those colours and add like a bit of a glaze over the top of some of those highlighted areas where you went in with the white. Then you could go back in with the light yellow glaze, look at the bottom of the neck and just add a light layer over the top to kind of tint those highlights. Like that. So for those shadowy areas and those darker, softer details, I'm just going to start by going in with the shade Sanguine, which we've not used yet. It's more of like a dull orange. I'm just going to use this underneath the neck where we've got those shadowy areas. And you want to work or shade around some of those highlighted parts. Maybe just a little bit along the top of the neck. I'm going to leave that there, I think, with the shade Sanguine. I'm just going to finish off the top of the neck by going back in with the light cobalt blue. So we're bringing back in some of those blue tones that have kind of got lost underneath all of those layers. So I'm bringing that blue colour back up to the surface. Just adding a little bit along the outer edge. To make that blue slightly more intense, I'm going to go in with the light blue, which is a little bit more vibrant, and just literally add a touch of that to those sort of similar areas. I think a tiny little bit amongst all these orangey feathers, it just really, you know, enhances that lighting, and it's a nice contrast between the two. So I'm just going to finish off with two pencils, the shade Scarlet and the shade Dark Cadmium Orange, which is what we've used mostly probably to build up all of this gorgeous tonal value. So I'm going to start with the Scarlet first, the darkest one, and just, you know, shade around some of these highlights, add in those last little bits of darker, like soft details amongst the feathers. With luminance pencils, when you're coming towards the end of a drawing, I don't really use them much for like details and finishing off bits like this, because it still does pick up a little bit of that grainy texture, even though we've almost completely squashed it down. Because luminance pencils are so like waxy and soft, they just sort of apply a lot thicker than the polychromos. So I always like to finish off really using the polychromos, because they're a much harder pencil, being predominantly oil based. So, you know, when you're squashing all those colours into the paper, it's a lot easier to do that with polychromos, and obviously you can get all that finer detail and everything like that as well with polychromos. It's just a lot easier. But in terms of just finishing off the colour aspect, I just wanted to get a little bit more of this scarlet in before I finish off with the dark cadmium orange, and then we should be pretty much finished, I think. So I'm going to leave that there, I think, with the scarlet, and just finish off with the dark cadmium orange. So basically go over where we've just added that scarlet to kind of blend it back into everything else, if it has picked up a bit of that grainy texture with it being so like waxy. think I'm probably going to leave that there for part 3. I mean, you could keep working on it forever, but I'm happy with the softness of those details, and everything's looking completely smooth now. We don't really have any of that grainy texture left. And I've just finished off some of those details at the top of the neck. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave that there for part 3. So as usual, I've left the line drawing, the full materials list and the reference photo in the video description below. If you've got any questions at all, then do let me know. I think I mentioned at the start as well, those 3 Pan Pastels that I've bought for, you know, the remaining feathers that we've got to draw for like the wings and everything. Just to let you know what them 3 shades are again, just in case you want to get them. It's the Permanent Red Tint, the Magenta Tint and the Pearlescent Red. So those 3, they're just a nice like range of sort of subtle pinks that would work quite well as like a base layer for some of these feathers, because we have got quite a few to draw, so I thought it might just help us slightly speed up the process and give us that sort of extra softness, which might be nice amongst our colour pencil work. So yeah, thank you for watching part 3. I can't wait to see more of your updates on this drawing, because I've seen some of you make a start on it and already it looks really, really good. So yeah, very excited to keep working on this piece. I hope you all have a lovely weekend, and I'll be back very shortly with part 4.